Maybe you can interpret, Pete.
Hey, he's going to have some good questions. Let me let some people in. And folks, I'm being careful here. I'm letting people in. We are taping right now, but we'll do an intro in a minute because of hackers. We've got as much security as possible, but these hackers are good. So bear with us. If there's a hacker, I'll get them off. We'll also edit the video on that. Okay, we are live on Facebook. We are recording. We're live on Twitter. Let me let in a couple people still. Just letting in a few more. I will do a quick intro here. We'll be ready to rock and roll. Just so you know, in about a half hour, Tom may have to go take a call. He'll be back. If he's not back, we will do a second half possibly next week. So we'll let you know about that through your email.
So Peter, while we're listening to your dog, I'll make an apology right now. My wife is having a new fence put up. So if you ever any pounding or sawing, you can blame it on Marie, not me. Okay. And those of you that have wives, you understand.
That's a new one for me on the dog, to be honest with you. But there's always something new, folks. Live on Facebook. I'm sure the Facebook people and the Twitter people are having a blast on this. I'm just waiting 30 more seconds.
It's because you're smart as a cat while that dog's going crazy.
Yeah, you know what happens is he hears the bell and I can't mute it. So unfortunately, we're stuck with that for a second here. I bet you never had that on any of your Zoom shows anywhere that you guys were on. We are taking, I'm going to do an intro here. 3, 2, 1. Hey, what's up, everybody? Pete Caliendo, Baseball Outside the Box. We are back from our break. What a break we had. You got to have a break. It really re-energizes you. Had my espresso. Special thanks to everybody joining us today on Facebook Live, on Twitter, Zoom. Also, a special, I guess, shout out to our friends all over Canada. It is Canada Day, so welcome and for joining the show. Really appreciate it. Don't forget, all we ask on the show is that you go to YouTube, register, because all the shows are also on YouTube, and also register at Baseball Outside the Box. Let's get rocking and rolling because we got a little time here to get started, and we will, welcome our guest, Tom House. And I don't even have to welcome him. I've known Tom for over 30 years, one of the best in the business when it comes to biomechanics, mental, emotional training, you name it. He is the best. I love this guy. Why? Because he's so loyal. So let's not even waste any time. Welcome, Tom House. How you doing, Tom?
Real good, Peter. Good to be here.
Yeah, listen, I apologize for the dog barking. I think he's done right now. Also, his top assistant, and I wrote this down, Dean Doxakis. Did I say that right? I think I screwed it up.
So close. Yeah, but, that's why everybody just calls us Docs. They don't even try, so.
Doxakis?
Doxakis,
yes,
nailed it. There you go. Good job. Yeah.
Dean is Tom's top man, and he will continue the talk. Now, if he was Italian, I wouldn't have a problem with the name. So, but that's all right. I love Greeks also. So, hey, folks, let's get started. Tom, let's not waste any time. I know you're limited to your time. Here's my question, and then we'll take questions in the chat. 40 years, whatever it's been. I mean, you were there when Baseball Outside the Box hadn't even started. You were an outside thinker. You were a challenger of the status quo, and you took a lot of hits for it, but you did it professionally. And now you're at a point where, I want to know what's new. What have you been doing, and what's new with the industry?
All right, well, thanks for the great intro. Really, what you just said is I'm the world's greatest expert on what doesn't work. So that's what we've been battling for the last almost 50 years. And what it boils down to is I kind of hit the crease. I was very fortunate to hit the crease between old school and where we are right now with new school and technology and all the science. And we didn't really, I'd like to say it was a well thought out, well planned with good strategy approach. Had no clue what we were doing, except we kept trying to get better at everything we did. So it started off with biomechanics, you know, what our eyes were actually seeing at 40 frames a second, and what was actually going on with a throw or a swing were virtually two different things. So we started with our first system we looked at was a Kodak system in 1986 when I was with the Texas Rangers. Myself and a guy named Coop Duren had a look at it, but it was too cumbersome and it wasn't efficient for a baseball capture. The next go around came with Gideon Aerial up at Coda de Casa and Vic Braden's tennis school. Then we found something you could actually translate into baseball. And I saw Glenn Fleisig's name a couple seconds ago, but motion analysis, nobody ever even knew. Once we started capturing, we didn't even know what we had for about 2-3 years. But what the aerial system allowed us to do was to film in the major leagues, elite pitchers and elite hitters. And after we had 100, 150 captures, we looked at the capture and started looking for common denominators, things that the great ones did. So our initial modeling didn't start with a group of little leaguers all over the world. It started with the best in the business in the major leagues. And we worked backwards from that point in time. And I have to give baseball kind of a pat on the back. I think this is really a great time for baseball, rotational sports in general, because the technology out there is awesome. People are capturing with all kinds of integrity now. The one thing that separates what we do, and I'm sure Dean will help me out with this, for all our measurables, all the captured data we have, we're one of the few organizations out there that actually have a deliverable or a teach to go with anything we identify as a non-efficient delivery or some inefficient strength. So without getting too long here, the new stuff for me, we've come up with an app that is cell phone friendly. I call it a mobile mentoring device. For the past 2.5 years, everything that is in my head, good, bad, and indifferent, successes or failures, has been programmed and logged in to where if you have a cell phone, you can get the same motion analysis in 3 dimensions. You can get a strength test, you can get mental emotional reframing, and a nutrition evaluation all on a cell phone. So that literally is a mobile mentoring device. Now with that technology, we humanize it through the National Pitching Association, and Dean is my main guy with that. We have upwards of 25, 26 facilities around the country where the hands-on, face-to-face instruction goes. So we're capturing data through artificial intelligence, and we're humanizing it with hands-on training in these facilities. So that, in a nutshell, is what I've been doing recently.
Awesome. And Dean, you know, you mentioned Dean. Obviously, Dean's going to take over later on. So, folks, if you got questions, I would type them in the chat room now so we can get some of the questions to Tom. But understand, Tom said Dean is one of the best in the business. So, you know, we're in great hands either way. So we'll look forward to it. So check it out on your chat. Hey, Tom, one of the things you mentioned was, you know, and this is my concern. And a great example came up the other day on one of the shows. Someone said to me, he said, well, we know about spin rate, you know, and we know, you know, Rapsodo does all this stuff, but how do we teach it? How do we increase the spin? And that's what you're talking about. You have ways to implement, not just talk about it.
Pete, that's awesome. We actually have a teach to go with every evaluation, every measurable that the Rapsodos and the Moto sleeves and all those great technologies provide. So we identify an issue and we come up with a way to you know, facilitate the fix to that issue.
That's a really good point. I mean, we have all this awesome technology out there. You can get overloaded with the amount of data that you can collect now. And really what matters is, can you take that data and turn it into a training program that can actually give you results out of the athlete? And so not only get the results, but, or I should say, not only the training program be helpful, but it needs to be very cross-specific to a correct biomechanical sequence. So that's kind of where we kind of shine in this industry, is that, yeah, we've been using data for a long time, but what we do so well and trying to help others do is take that data and now let's say, okay, I've got this data. How can I turn this into something that makes a difference for this athlete? And that's what we do so well.
You know, and the second part to this, and I'm going right to the questions now. The second part is keeping it simple, because again, I've been on social media and man, there's stuff on there. Look, I've got a college degree, but there's stuff on there that I just don't understand. I mean, I could read 3 sentences and maybe understand 5 words. So I think keeping it simple is the next part. And how important you see that, whether it be Tom or Dean, how important you see that being for coaches, because we're not talking about coaches just in college and high school and pro ball. We're talking about the foundation of the sport being the youth baseball, and that's where we need it.
That's a great point.
Yeah.
And I think I mentioned earlier in the show that I've been blessed because I was part of the old school and still hanging around with what the new era is, the new school. So we actually have coaching vocabulary that we try to use. There's absolutely nothing wrong with the propeller heads. That's what I call the guys that capture the data and sit up in the manager's box or in the owner's box and call all the pitches and do it. There's nothing wrong with that, but their vocabulary and a coaching and teaching vocabulary sometimes don't match up. And that's what's so great about these kind of shows, Pete, is that it gives everybody a chance to kind of coordinate the vocabulary.
Fantastic. We're going to do something a little different. We're going right to the questions. Please mute your mic if it's not muted so we don't get any background noise. From Tyler, Wabansi Community College, looks like, what kind of mechanical changes, techniques, and drills do you believe in to support getting down the mound fast? And I remember you always talk about we got to get down fast. Can you explain that?
All right, I'll give you the coach's words, and Dean, you can back me up if I screw it up. We call it, basically GFF, go friggin' fast. All right.
That's basically simple to understand.
Yeah, I'm gonna keep your eyes level, firm up your front side, and drag your back foot. And those 4 things encompass timing, sequencing, the variables that coaches teach from balance and posture all the way through release point. And then the drag foot staying on the ground is like a rudder on a boat. So inside of GFF, eyes level, firm front side, drag your foot, back foot, there's probably 500 different things that can be taught in there, but that's as simple as you can go. You can go too slow, but you can't go too fast.
And as far as the GFF, what can really make a big difference is one step that comes before that, and your posture and balance before you ever start moving. If you're set up incorrectly to where things don't start correctly, then that GFF has a hard time happening. So make sure that you're looking at, are you set up, is your posture correct before you ever start trying to go GFF? Because if you are, it's going to be a lot easier and get that timing correct.
Let me jump on that. Peter, I'm sorry. Let me jump. It only takes 1 rep to change your position. It takes thousands of reps to change your movement. So we're looking for simplicity. It's Occam's razor. Glenn Fleisig will know what that is. The simplest solution is. So when you can position a kid and you get him moving, it goes position, movement, and then the task, the skill, the resistance, whatever it might be. But position first, then movement, and then whatever the activity goes. And when you add all those together, that's pretty much what we've researched and with measurables and deliverables.
Now, Tom, one of the things you've taught for years has been the drag line. That's come up on Twitter a couple of times now. Can you explain the drag line a little bit, the importance behind it, and how it helps you?
Sure. And again, I'm going to go backwards for a little bit first. When I first got into pro ball, they told us to drag our back foot when we wanted to throw a changeup.
Yeah.
Well, that was a good idea for the wrong reasons. Okay. What the back foot drag line does, it has to do with what we're calling vector management. The back foot drag line literally keeps your body on the target line to home plate, from the middle of the rubber to the middle of home plate. The back foot drag line, it should be 2 of your feet and stay on the ground till the ball leaves your hand, is an indicator of what your balance and posture are doing as you go into the delivery of the ball. So it's basically, it's a facilitator for your head movement, and it's an indicator of how efficient all your vectors are going toward home plate.
I will take another question. Go ahead.
Yeah, one of the biggest issues or misinformation we see about the drag line is people will believe that it has something to do with reducing velocity if you have a drag line, which is the exact opposite. If anything, it helps actually create more velocity by directing all your vectors the right direction, allowing that energy to go in the baseball.
Excellent. And another question here on the, looks like how important is the hip tilt in the GFF? And folks,
That's a good question.
Yeah, it's a good question. And we're going to, there's also a question about the app. We'll get you the information on the app. We'll also email it to you and put it in the show notes, but go ahead.
I'll start first, and Dean, you can correct me. What happens when an athlete gets to the mound, because the only unnatural thing about pitching is the slope of the mound. And people get all caught up with hip tilt, shoulder tilt, all that kind of stuff. If you can arrange yourself to be parallel to the slope you're throwing on. So a flat ground throw, if your hips and shoulders were basically parallel to flat ground, that would be fine for flat ground. If you're on the mound, you want to readjust your posture to fit the slope of the mound. If you do that, then instead of being the right side of a right triangle where you go down and forward, you're going down perfectly parallel to the mound. So it's a teach. There's nothing wrong with the way people teach hips and shoulders, but it may not be necessary for many athletes.
One of the problems that's happened with this onset of people trying to create hip tilt is that what happens is an athlete will actually, to an attempt to move their hip forward and tilt it, they'll shift all their upper body weight back. And now we've disrupted the sequence when we do that. So whatever you're trying to accomplish, now it's been disrupted. The hip tilt will naturally happen if you just set up correctly and lift correctly, okay? So if we have a balanced position where our feet are equal to our hips or our armpits and weights applied equal to both feet, when we lift up and back to our glove, guess what happens? Your hip goes forward. Okay, so it's more about, again, back to what Tom said, fix your position, and guess what happens? Things will start to fall into place correctly.
Awesome. And Tom, I'm going to jump to the head for a second. And this is almost two questions. The head movement, I remember you talking about, this was a while ago about Roger Clemens, when he adjusted his head tilt, how much that helped him. How much of that is true now? How does the head work? And also, the other part is the question from Mike, and it's a good question because you mentioned it on Twitter about, if you're teaching things from 5 years ago, you're not really up to date. What things have you changed from the last 5 years?
Well, we've always known, even from the early research, that any misdirected movement with your head would cause a problem with release point. Well, we now know that 1 inch of inappropriate head movement, up, down, east, west, or away from home plate, will cause about 2 inches at release point. And if you're just standing with your head in a neutral position, you can be 15 degrees inside the width of your body without having too much of an issue with inappropriate head. So guys that have a tilt in head, Lincecum, there's guys that will have a little tilt in their head as they go in to their delivery into foot strike. But by the time they square up to throw the ball, their eyes are all level. So the first thing we try to do with balance and posture is get your head over your center of gravity between the balls of your feet. And when you look to home plate, keep your eyes as level to the horizon as you can.
Dean, anything?
Another one that's a good example of tilt, but ends up eyes level is Aroldis Chapman. Same thing. He's tilted all the way coming into foot strike, and as he gets into release, he'll level out almost perfect. But again, it's the thing about the head position also about caution release. That's what determines if you're your natural arm slot a lot. We hear a lot about arm slot, and people trying to raise up to get release height when actually it's actually cutting the distance and getting ball movement instead of downward angle. And only that happens with eyes level. So if you want someone to be in their natural arm slot, it comes down to what's going on. Are their eyes level going into release?
Great. Another question. What are your thoughts on balance point versus drift and equal and opposite and the drift?
If an object at rest wants to remain at rest, you can be balanced dynamically. But to sit over your back leg and achieve a balance point before you start forward is like having 2 starts. So what you want to do to minimize the time into foot strike, all right, to get the most out of your weight shift and your energy translation and hold the runners closer and control the running game, is that you want to be moving forward the millisecond you lift. So if you set up like Dean just said, both knees, bent equally, feet armpit width, looking into the target with your eyes level, when you lift, you're going to be balanced all the way through your delivery, but it is a dynamic balance, not a static balance. If you lift and stop, then you're just asking your body to reset the clock from wherever you stopped with your leg lift.
Hey, Tom, and this isn't really a question, but you taught in Japan. I've been to Japan 30 times, I think. Let's not tell the Japanese that then, right?
Well, here's the deal.
Well,
do you understand? Because they still believe, and again, we don't argue with anybody anymore. It goes all the way back to when baseball came to Japan. All those old school pitchers would have 2 or 3 pumps in their windup, and they all stopped at the top. And they all did really weird things. In the transition, it became part of their teach. No problem at all. They do really well with it. Watch them when they're pitching here in the United States, controlling the running game. They're really good at controlling the running game. Mm-hmm. But when they're in the windup, you will see everything going back to, Johnson, Koufax, all those guys. You'll see stuff going in the windup. But when it comes time to go to the stretch, they're just like we are.
Like, Tom, something new that's been coming about recently for the last probably 4 or 5 years. We're talking about being uncomfortable, using different devices, different weights, to teach certain things. And one thing works for one, another doesn't for the other. How do we decipher all this in our teaching process?
Well, there's like one set of rules, but there's a million interpretations. And people still there's a difference between weight training and strength training. And I'm going to take a couple seconds on this. There are windows of trainability. There's a neurological window, there's a muscle window, there's a skill acquisition window, and a skill retention window. And what we have to be very careful about doing is making sure that if like a 12-year-old could be taught weight training, but it wouldn't do him any good because he's in a neurological window, where all he should be doing is having nerves teach muscle and bone what to do. So depending on the individual, what earlier Dean said, it's all cross-specific, it's personally adapted. You have to identify the athlete for what window he's in, and then come up with a protocol that will maximize where he is with his framing mentally, his patterning neurologically, and his training with his muscles, that combination. And believe it or not, we actually do that with the Mustard app that we have. It takes care of all that thinking for the coach or the mom and dad or the athlete.
So if we're talking about putting them in uncomfortable situations, a balance beam, putting a ball here to hold the angle, where does that apply, in what area that you just talked about?
If you have something that helps the kid with a feel that helps him be more efficient, no holds barred. There's no one right drill for everybody, or one right drill for every mechanical inefficiency, or one way to strength train. There's a multitude of choices. And what you have to do is figure out for that athlete what we call the path of least resistance. How do you order the chaos to get the most out of this kid in the least amount of time?
All right.
Say something to that real quick. And then, because you mentioned, putting a ball here with arm, and yes, there's a million different ways of doing it. But one thing that has to always come back to, and that's that biomechanical sequence, a correct one, a kinematic sequence. And the thing about that is that if you're changing timing to foot strike, guess what else is changing? What's going on here? So if you go straight to just trying to train the arm to be how you want it to be, and you've skipped through the timing to foot strike, you may be not training it at all. So it's important that I say with any training platform that it is very cross-specific to the entire sequence, not just one segment of it.
Perfect. All right, let's get a question here. When do you like to see pitchers do with their wrist as they're pitching? firm wrist, non-firm wrist. I remember in the old days, remember we taught being flexible, and then later on, be firm. Talk about that a little bit.
Well, we found, and Motus Sleeve research has helped us with this, that at release point, the firmer the wrist, the more effective and efficient your command is. There is no wrist snap throwing any pitch. All right, so what we've actually come up with as that works the best for most everybody is you want to cut the ball in half, whatever your grip is, cut the ball in half with your thumb and your middle finger and squeeze. And the pitch movement is created by the position of wrist and forearm. The only pitch that might be a little different than that would be on a split finger or a fork ball. But what it boils down to, if you want to stabilize a mobile joint, which is a wrist, you recruit muscle below and above that joint. There is no wrist snap on any pitch. All right, so the firmer the wrist, and that's accomplished by squeezing thumb and middle finger through the middle of the baseball and creating angle with your wrist and your forearm.
And with the new technology and the cameras we have today, that's really evident. It's, you can look at anybody's release now, and you're going to see there's no this or this. It's straight.
Rick Johnson from Canada, our buddy, welcome, and also the happy Canada Day to all Canadians online. His question is, what are your thoughts on teachers like equal and opposite versus positive disconnection?
Positive disconnection, I think, has to do with hip and shoulder separation. Opposite and equal just means that at foot strike, to maintain that balance we're talking about, whatever your throwing arm is doing, your glove side arm has to have a mirror image, or you're going to fall off the tightrope. So opposite and equal for us is making sure that you have balance bilaterally all the way through the delivery. At foot strike, whatever your throwing forearm looks like relative to the elbow, there's got to be a mirror image of it on the front side. That's our opposite and equal.
And also Jeff Morgan asks, basically with the hand separation, where does that occur? Do you teach it? How does that work?
We have that as a biomechanical inevitability. You never have to teach a shortstop when to break his hands. I think a pitcher, if just left to his own devices, will break his hands based on what makes the most sense to him kinesthetically.
And I think you mentioned this already, but I'm going to just bring it up. Tyler mentions when is stacking and tracking critical upon the point of foot strike? How detrimental is the weak stack and track to the pitcher's motion?
Real quick, if you can, as you land and go through your opposite and equal and your hip and shoulder separation and delayed shoulder rotation, as your shoulders square up to the target, if you can keep your shoulders perpendicular to home plate, while the low back goes into hyperextension just before flexion, that's the last 20% of velocity. 80% of velocity comes from torque from hip and shoulder separation. If the shoulders square up and you can maintain that upright posture as long as you possibly can, when the low back goes from extension to flexion after stacking and tracking, you're behind the ball and creating more arm speed with your forearm and your hand in the ball.
Tom, where we at? Remember, we used to say, and you can correct me, obviously, you're going to correct me. The longer the stride, the more power you get, but obviously you've got to be flexible and you've got to have some strength to do that. Where are we at with that now?
It boils down to time, force equals mass times acceleration. You have to get as far and as fast as you can. And obviously the further you stride in the same time frame, the more ground force production you're going to have. The more ground force production you have, the more foot-pounds of energy. The more energy you have, the harder you throw easy. So 1 foot of distance is 3 miles an hour in the hitter's eyes. Can you hang on here? I yell at my wife real quick. 1 foot of distance, 3 miles an hour to the hitter's eyes. If you're a 6 foot pitcher and you have a 7 foot stride and you weigh 200 pounds, that extra 200 foot-pounds is usually right around 3 miles an hour. So you want to go as far and as fast as you can. Our models are showing you will stride around 6 feet of his feet. The guys that are studs are 7+. There's been a few like a Nolan Ryan that gets 7 3/4. Dean, what was Chapman's? He's like
He's 7,
almost,
at least 7.
he's at 7. So the further you get in the same time frame, the better you're going to be, and the easier you're going to throw hard.
The
Tom,
key is the
before-
time frame there. You
Go ahead.
can, if you stride 6 feet in, you know, a certain amount of time, and then you go 7 feet and it takes you longer, you're really not. It has to be the same amount of time in order for that formula to be the same. So.
Can I throw one more thing in? Glenn Fleissig went around you, Peter. He wanted us to explain the towel drill. So the towel drill is not a release point drill. It's a neurological drill. If you want one drill to teach your body's nervous system how to throw efficiently, not for a release point and not for strength, but nerves talking to muscle for mechanical efficiency, the towel drill on flat ground and mound is the most efficient thing we found to do it. And with that, I've got to get moving. Peter, if I don't make it back today, we're doing this again next week.
Yes.
Dean, pick me up. And if they
Gotcha.
start booing you, blame it on me.
Okay.
Okay. Thanks for listening, everybody. Talk to you soon.
We'll be back next week with Tom. Thank you. Hey, Dean, let's continue here.
Real on that towel drill real quick, just to make
Yeah,
sure,
yeah, no,
because
go
that's where most people will relate it to an arm drill, arm training. It's not. It's, if you look at it in slow motion, yeah, it's going to be completely different than releasing a ball, but that's not the purpose of the drill. So it's about the entire sequence and nerve pathway. So
Since you're on that, where are we putting the contact point for the towel drill? Is there a contact point? Like
you can do it with or without. So if it doesn't require to have a target, but that if you do want to have a target, it's important that it's located correctly. For instance, I go around and I see people doing towel drills. I'm hitting a bucket on the ground. Nobody releases a ball down there. So why would you pattern that way? So it needs to be the pitcher's eye level at foot strike, about 5 of his steps from where his landing foot is.
Dean, I was interested because I know it came up as a question, and I gave Tom 2 questions at one time, and that was my fault. What have you seen in your research, in your guys' work, in Tom's work, that over the last 5 years has changed? Because some of the things that's been on social media are things that have been there for a little while.
So one of the things, with that statement we made about that is, it's everybody's saying, well, you're still doing a lot of some of the stuff you used to do. Yes, because it still works and it's good stuff. The point of that was saying that we're always looking to be better and find new things as well. And one of the latest things we've worked on in the last couple of years is called vectors. And so vectors is a measure of both magnitude and direction. So you can create energy in a lot of it, but if it's not efficient, then you're not getting it into the baseball and it's turning into stress. So that's where we've been spending a lot of our efforts lately, is just making sure that, again, back to us being a health first company and performance, we want to make sure that the energy we're creating, asking people's workloads to go up, is done very efficiently to where it's less stress.
And folks, we're going to get to your questions. Do not worry. We want to get to yours. It's very important. But I do want to add one thing, Dean. I want to ask, here I'm seeing this a lot. And again, from a layman's person like myself, who's seen pitchers practicing and, they'll throw and then they spin, and I'm been told that, well, once you release the ball, it really doesn't matter because the body was moving in that direction. Talk a little bit about that, because to me, I was always thinking, well, if you spin and go that way, how can my energy go that way, but I'm throwing the ball that way? But I guess the ball's gone already.
Correct. And again, sometimes it has to do with your stride. We have a lot of different stride patterns with pitchers. Some are straight, some are open, some are closed. It tends to be a player's signature, not a biomechanic. What matters is that the spine is centered at release. So you can actually stride different directions and get your spine centered at release depending on where you start on the rubber. And so we always look to see where the correct place is for someone on the rubber. But you can be an effective pitcher, and typically guys that stride more closed have a tendency to fall off after the ball leaves their hand. But it's not a consequence to the pitch.
And if we jump back to the drag line, if the drag line can also determine if you're doing something incorrectly, you can move them over left or right because of the drag line. That's something that can happen during the game because you're not teaching a mechanic, correct?
Correct. So basically what the drag line is that it's not really a biomechanic, it's an indication to whether the biomechanics are correct. So we can, if you look at where the drag line finishes, at release will tell you basically where the base of the spine is at release. So we want the base of the spine centered on the rubber so that it's centered on the plate. And the body is just so intuitive. If it's not centered at release, it always is trying to come back to it or get there. That's another reason why you'll see people falling off. So you move on the rubber until your drag line is centered at release. And if you don't have a drag line, get one.
Perfect. There you go. All right, Scott asked this at foot strike, the position of throwing on. This is something that's come up quite a bit. How important are you looking for a certain position, 90 degrees or whatever it may be, or is it what's natural to the body?
That's again more of a player signature, but there is some things we've noticed. For instance, guys that are 90 degrees or inside seem to be a little healthier. And we think that just a less shorter path to release, a little less stress. That needs to be studied a whole lot more. There is not one, some people have said, well, you got flat arm or whatever. We haven't seen that correlation as some people have said. We can find just as many healthy that way as hurt. So what's more important, again, this goes back to being cross-specific to the entire sequence, is, for instance, if we just change the way somebody sets up and they're timing the foot strike, all of a sudden now the arm gets into a better position at foot strike. So again, skipping ahead and just focusing on getting the arm to a certain position, you may be doing more harm than good. So fix the part before that, balance in position, lift and thrust, timing the foot strike, and then see where they're at, and then match the front to the back, and that's who they should be.
Stefan had asked this question early on, and Stefan, no, I didn't skip you on purpose. What I was waiting for, because I thought this question was more appropriate for Dean, and it's a great question. Stefan says, I work in the inner city high school. It's a high school coach. My guys are more athletic, and we're getting some great baseball players from all kinds of areas, but athletic and baseball players. Most of them have never worked with an actual pitching coach. What are some fundamental drills to use in this day and age to teach leg drive, arm slot, and balance point? I thought that was very good.
Okay. So for leg drive, really what we always like to tell people is to leap. Okay. And what we mean by that, and that gets misunderstood a lot, is that's what technical word is plantar flexion. If you look at how pitchers take off down the mound, just before they get in the foot strike, you're going to see that heel come off the ground, and we get what we call the plantar flexion. That's that last bit of drive that gets them out there just a little bit farther and quicker. So I would always make sure that they're trying to leap out instead of just reach out with their front foot. You can do that. A good way to do that and kind of sets up the whole motion is what we call our crossover drill. It presets the body in a proper energy angle where the butt is facing out. They lift, their body moves forward immediately, and they leap from there. Now, it's important that leap doesn't become up or down, horizontal to the surface parallel to the surface that you're on. So if it's a mound, it should follow that. If it's flat ground, it should follow that. And just be sure they're leaping and not just stepping or reaching out with the front foot.
And Stefan, I'll get you Dean's email too, because I think it'll help to follow up on that. And continue to do the great work you do in the inner city, man. We need it. Got a lot of great players there.
You mentioned arm slot too, I think. And just roll them a ball and tell them to throw it. And with their eyes are level, that's their arm slot. Don't change it. So.
Fantastic. Our friend from Mexico, Marco Mendoza. Is it normal pitchers that throw sidearm and across their body? Any concerns there?
No. Now, make sure, again, go back to is their spine centered on the rubber at release? Make sure that they're lined up correctly. You typically someone that when he says closed, I'm assuming they have a closed stride and it looks like they're cutting themselves off. But if their spine is centered, they're actually not. So there's no concern.
And the big leagues would be the big lefty with, oh boy, I went blank, the Giants.
Bumgarner?
Bumgarner, right?
Yeah. He's, eyes level and arm, out to the side.
Another question about pushing off the rubber. It's a push. At one time it was a fall, then it's a push. Explain that.
Yeah, it's really not a push, because what happens when you say push, and there's some stuff out there about having more contact with your foot on the ground. That's important for balance, but it's not good for creating energy, because when you go completely flat foot on the ground, there's no flexion in the knee. And so it's hard. Think about trying to jump up and down without bending your knee. You can't really create energy like that. And not that we're going up and pitching, but so it's more like that's why we like to use the term leap, is because that heel actually has to come off the ground for your knee to flex and be able to create that pop and that energy. So yeah, so it's more not a fall for sure, and it's not a push, because then you'll want to keep your whole foot on the ground. Think about leaping. If you're leaping, you're probably going to get the right energy.
Excellent. Something that is a concern with science, science changes. You've got science on one end, you got science on another end. I remember we talked about a long time ago, going downhill, being careful, because there's more stress when you're pitching downhill than if you're pitching on flat ground. Is that science still out there, or have we changed our minds on that? And I talk about that because now more kids are pitching all year round, and they're training all year round, even in Illinois or even in cold weather areas. So now we got kids throwing in December off a mound. Is that a concern?
I think it's more of the intent of the throw versus the surface that you're on. That data has gone back and forth, and I don't think there's a good conclusion on it yet. We're in tendency to believe that flat ground is a little better for you, but I think it's maybe more because people's intent is just a little bit less. Again, the harder you throw, the more stress. It's the fact of it. The harder you throw inefficiently, even more stress. So I think if someone has really good efficiencies, and it could go either way, but we prefer to stay flat ground. So.
Baseball outside the box. Pete Caliendo taking you all over the world. My good friend Beppe Gulizione from Italy, national team coach, has a question. In Italy, we have 3 youth divisions: under 12, under 15, under 18. That's what the international rules are now. In which of these divisions do you recommend to go deep in teaching pitching? So where do you start? Where do you begin with the pitching aspect?
Was it on those age groups, Peter?
You got 12 and under, you got 15 under, 18 under. So basically, when do you start teaching pitching compared to, throwing, and where does it all start? Sorry.
I see at age about 10 years old that they can actually grasp a correct biomechanical movement, understand it, and start to pattern it. I think before that, it's more about just letting them be themselves and throw, have a good time, play. But definitely by 12, you should be teaching correct biomechanical movements and patterns. And then once they get, because back to Tom's question or comment on windows of trainability, right around 12 years old is when kids will move from the first window of trainability of nerve pathway to testosterone kicking in the second window. You can start adding more weight work and functional strength work at that point.
All right, another question. When looking at Scherzer and Pedro, among others, I'm assuming Pedro Martinez, and that they're not always at equal and opposites at foot strike. So maybe explain that.
Yeah, I mean, it's not always going to be perfect. And again, I'll say that pros can do it wrong sometimes too. So, but
he's had surgery. I mean, he's had some surgeries on his shoulder, I believe, or elbow. I can't remember now.
Yeah, I mean, everything comes at a cost. But again, Pedro did a lot of things really well too. His eyes were low at release, and he had a lower slot than most people believed he did when you look at it in slow motion. But yeah, not exactly perfect, but I can't recall his option equal right now, but so I don't know how far off it was. But you want to everything. I would say if you can get everything as close as possible, but there's always leeway a little bit.
Sure. I mean, and I guess there are ways. Some guys, they can't be perfect in everything they do. Still be pretty successful at it. I remember Kerry Wood. He wasn't perfect in a lot of other areas, and his career didn't last very long. He probably should have been a Hall of Famer.
Right.
Pat asked. It says, and Tom may have addressed this in the towel drill, but he says, when I did the towel drill as a player and teaching it as a coach, it helped me to have timing where the towel makes contact a split second after foot strike. Is there something that you can talk about in reference to that?
Yeah, so in our biomechanical model, when we look at all the elites, they're in foot strike somewhere between 0.95 and 1.05 seconds from first forward movement. And then they're releasing the ball in about 1.25 seconds. So that again, with towel drill to target, you can kind of simulate that. And it's almost like foot strike and release it. Okay, so same thing. Your foot hits and whack, you should be hitting the target with the towel.
And this is a little different show, folks, because this is probably the show that's had the most questions out of any show that I've had. I've had over 80 Zoom shows. So it's fantastic. So I'm going to go to Larry Sorensen's question. At what age does the particular movements of the ball and the measurements become important?
They become more important to the outside world to the actual pitcher, probably in high school. So, but I'm assuming we're talking about spin rate and horizontal vertical break and things like that.
Larry's shaking his head, yes.
Yeah, so it shouldn't even be a topic of discussion for anybody that's pre-high school. Let them just work on biomechanics and stay healthy. And not worry about that stuff, use the proper health protocols. And then when they get into high school, yes, they're going to start looking at those things because they're measurables for recruiting. And here's the good news. If you did your job up to that point and learned a correct biomechanical sequence, guess what happens? Those numbers are what they're looking for. So we, our protocols, the way we teach about swivel and stabilize the glove actually increases spin rate. So because you're tracking better into release, a little farther at release point, more backspin, more spin rate. So I would put all my focus into, do I have a good, correct biomechanical movement and patterns? And if I do, then you're probably going to get those results and those stats that you're looking for.
Dean, when you talk about that, I look at the Japanese, for years, I mean, more than 100 years. They're going back and, their routine has always been long toss, flexibility, strength. They work harder than anybody in the world. So
right.
Nobody matches them. But also, they've all got great arms. Now, some of them can release the ball fast as an infielder. And it looks like they got a great arm, but most of them have pretty good arms. And they can all throw hard. They're throwing every day. They're not pitching every day, but they're throwing every day. Now, we know the maximum they do overdo the pitching aspect. I get that part.
Right,
but
right.
the concern is when you're increasing arm strength and getting velocity, because that's a big topic nowadays. I know there's many ways, but what are the consistent and safe ways? Because I just saw an article on weighted balls, and now we're going to bring up another issue. That's going to have to be a whole new show. But what are the consistent patterns? Biomechanics is one, obviously. But what are other things that guys and gals should be teaching to make sure that players are getting stronger when they're throwing?
Well, let's just clarify about whether actual throwing creates strength in the arm or not. And the bottom line is every time you let go of the implement, you're taking strength out of the arm. Okay, and I'm not the only one that will comment on this. There's some really good trainers out there that understand this concept. So it's foot-pounds of stress coming out of your arm every time you let go of the ball. Okay, what it can do though, when you do long toss and things like that, you're actually increasing your speed thresholds. So that's why you're able to throw farther, faster. But it's not like conditioning. It's like if you were to do a dumbbell routine, would you take the dumbbell and throw it against the wall to get your arm stronger? No, you wouldn't. So there's foot-pounds going out, there's foot-pounds coming in. So we do a lot more holds in other companies, but again, that's probably a whole nother show, but that's the reason for it. We believe in building the strength before we build the speed. So if you think that you're getting stronger by throwing, it's not actual strength you're building speed thresholds and moving faster. And so you can actually do that without letting go if you use an object less the weight of a baseball, like a towel. That's why the towel can be so important. So what do we do in long toss? We shuffle step. We move our body as fast as we possibly can, and we're creating ground force. And at the same time, when you let go of that ball, you're creating stress. So I'm not against it. I'm just saying that know the purpose of it. And so, yes, you can do your long toss for your speed thresholds and testing yourself. But if you want to build strength, you need to do it in a way that actually puts strength back into the arm.
Okay, and so give me some other ideas of how I can strengthen my arm if I'm going to do consistently certain things.
Body work and isometric work is the safest way to build arm strength and strengthen your joints. That's when you're using your own body weight, closed chain type movements. When you're using, just your body weight and movement is because it works both acceleration and deceleration parts of the muscle groups at the same time. So planks, great for the shoulder and great for the body and great for the arm. There's, you know, we do, like I said, we do a lot of holds so that we're duplicating a correct biomechanical movement with weight. We do slow motion throws, and those are what we call PNF, or it's a really long word that won't ask anybody to spell, but proprioceptive neuromuscular facilitation. I'm going to get all that out. And basically what we're doing is we're programming nerve pathways, we're building muscle, and that can be done in both forward and reverse motions.
You know, Dean, I was reading, I want to talk about a little bit about the deceleration phase, then I'm going to get to some questions that kind of back us up to some other things you talked about. But the deceleration phase, excuse me, I was reading that the brain, if the brain understands that your muscles are not strong enough, it's not going to let you throw as hard as you want. But at the same time, we're concerned about deceleration. So what's the protocol when it comes to deceleration? If you decelerate properly, does that help you reduce the ability to get injured? I know it can't be perfect, but does that help?
Yeah, it's not a cure-all, but it definitely helps you stay healthier. If you look at
and throw harder.
Yeah, exactly, and you're right on. It's the human body, again, is very intuitive. It will not let you typically accelerate something unless it's capable of decelerating it, and so, or it tends to be more of it'll break. It's kind of like putting not making fun of any particular car, but it's like taking a Ferrari and putting Hyundai brakes on it. You know, you may go really fast, but might not be able to stop and crash. So way we design our workouts is that it's teaching both or conditioning both front side and back side. And the thing about that is you kind of have to outweigh the back side to the front, because we have more acceleration muscles than we have deceleration, but you're asking them to do the same. So for what we do on the front, we probably do twice as much on the back of the shoulder or the back of legs. Things like that.
Excellent. Let's take a question here. From Tim, does the backside arm action matter much to the MPA formula as a pre-foot strike action? Do the guys prefer a shorter arm on the backside, or have any other studies shown benefit to one side or the other?
There's no, we don't have any hard data, or I should say studies on that yet, but just from our own eyes, watching pictures and looking at patterns, guys that are short on the back have had a tendency to be healthier and seem to be a little more deceiving to batters, is what we see. So, you know, I think where people get really or misunderstand the whole arm action is that their eyes are seeing what's happening before foot strike. So you'll see an arm go through all different patterns. Some guys drop down low, some reach back, some hold it close the entire time. But you gotta, again, they all end up coming back to a very similar spot by the time they get to foot strike. So you can't get caught up in what's happening in that pathway, or don't try and make somebody do a certain pathway going into foot strike. But yeah, we see that guys that are 90 to inside, just a little bit healthier and a little more deceiving.
Basically, if you want to know what somebody's arm action is, what's the best way to figure it out?
You got to do video and stop them at foot strike. Look and see what their arm is right there on the back. Whatever that angle is between forearm and elbow, you need to match it to the front. Match the front to that.
And if my arm goes down all the way, you know, where it almost locks,
yeah,
is that particular to that person, or is that something you correct?
That's a player signature. Again, yeah. Unless that's at foot strike, it doesn't matter.
Okay. All right. Also, we talked about leaping, and Mike just has a question. He wants you to go back a little bit. He didn't understand this part. Yeah. Are you leaping with your back foot or your front foot?
Yeah. So if you look at a pitcher in slow motion, right before they're getting in the foot strike, their heel will say, "This is my heel." The heel will come off the ground. And what happens? The knee bends when that happens. So that's the only way the knee is going to bend. If we have what we call that plantar flexion, where the heel comes off the ground, the knee will bend. What does that do? That gives you that ability to launch yourself a little bit more, because of the flexion in the knee going into extension. Okay, so just think about trying to create energy with a straight leg. You basically would just fall. You wouldn't be creating any more linear energy. So again, yes, you do have to have a completely flat foot on, you know, a lot of points of contact with the foot as you're lifting and you're starting to stride out, yes. But before you get into foot strike, if you don't have that flexion, you're not going to create as much linear energy. You're not going to have as long as a stride and that shorter and that same amount of time that creates that more energy.
You know, Stefan mentioned, we're going back to spin rate. With college players, you mentioned one area, how to improve the spin, one of your drills that improves the spin rate. Any others?
Yeah, you can actually use, and this is, I have to be cautious in talking about this because we can do this because we do so much prep work before, but you're going to have to be, but you can actually work with lighter balls to increase spin rate. But if you just pick up a light ball and start chunking it, you're probably putting yourself at more risk for injury. You have to have a good protocol before that. I mean, someone that does our work before they ever get on the mound is gone through a whole lot. I mean, they have done core temporal elevation, they've done arm care and recovery, they've done upper body flexibility, and then they've done a bunch of pounding drills with holes, with weight, and and light. They've done a lot of reps before they get to the mound. And then we'll let them throw a light ball for spin rate protocol, but only then. I don't recommend you just taking a kid out there or any player saying, here, throw this light ball. It's probably not going to be good for his arm that way, but if they properly prepare. So here's the thing about throwing a super light ball. It will not track straight. It's actually biomechanical too. It will not track straight or rise unless you have everything lined up at release. So if you got a guy that does this or this, that thing's going straight in the ground every time. So it's a good indicator to that as well. So if you actually can get, like we use a 2 ounce, and it teaches them, and we'll let them go through just 5-6 throws before we throw the 5 ounce, just so they can feel getting lined up. And if that ball rises, they know they're increasing their spin rate.
Dean, we still talking about 10,000 rule when it comes to adjusting a particular movement or something that they're doing wrong?
Yeah, but we've actually gotten better at shortening that through awareness training. And we do that through the focus band. The focus band is a product that actually identifies where we're in our thinking state or awareness state, right and left brain. And so we can actually measure that now. And if we can get an athlete in awareness state while they're doing their training, you can cut that in half. But it's a practice they have to get into. It doesn't happen very quickly. But
and speaking about that, and I'm glad you brought the mental part, because I think that's an area that we don't focus on enough, especially nowadays. And with the, kids are indoors and it's a little tougher to train. What's the mental aspect? I know it could be a whole show, but what's the mental aspect when it comes to this?
So what typically we see is that, and this is why sometimes we take away result when we're training, is because when a kid stands up there and you can tell him, look, I need to get your glove in the right position and go ahead and throw and hit that target. There's only one thing his brain is focused on, that result, hitting that target. And there's very little chance that he's ever going to go to an awareness state and be aware of what his body's supposed to be doing now, not instead of trying to get a result. So a good thing, that's a good thing at home. You don't really need a target. You don't even need a ball. Just get the towel and come set, look away, and just be aware of the ground, be aware of how you're expecting your body to move, be aware that you want to go fast, and then go fast. And so what that does is it switches from thinking to awareness side of the brain. And now you're programming those nerves even faster.
Awesome. And Rick Johnston, thoughts on arm position at foot strike? We talked about this a little bit, but he asked, the elbow below the shoulder are inside of 90 degrees or et cetera, or arm inside 90?
Are we talking about shoulder abduction? The height of this, I'm assuming, is what he's saying. Abduction.
Yeah, go through both of them. Go through it. Both of them you're thinking about. Go.
So, there's you've seen some people that are saying that your shoulder abduction is, if you have it like too low or too high, is an issue. And that is a possibility. But I'll tell you this, the fix is not trying to fix the arm. That's a timing issue. If someone's shoulder abduction is not where it's supposed to be, which is pretty much level to shoulder, the elbow level to shoulder, check their timing. I guarantee you, they're too slow to foot strike. If you were to increase their timing to foot strike, you're going to see their arm in a totally different height or position. And again, that's why I keep coming back to, it's just so important that you're paying attention from the very start of the sequence, because that's going to affect every single thing. If you look at a kinematic sequence in a 3D motion analysis, everything comes together at one spot, and that's foot strike. And then all the lines separate. Okay, so if you're trying to fix something farther down the process by just focusing on that, you're probably missing the cause. So.
Dean, I know most of us, obviously, it doesn't matter. Most people have phones. They can use some type of slow motion device on their phones. If they can't, let's just say we were in a position where we don't have one. Are we saying that we can have a young pitcher, any age, just stop at foot strike, don't tell him anything, and then realize where he's at, and then make the adjustments and let him go back and try to get those back to that correct adjustment?
Are you saying without a phone, without video?
Yeah, let's say I just have him, I say, okay, go ahead and just pretend like you're going to throw, but when your foot strikes, stop and show me where, let's see where the body's at.
It's typically not the same as if they're trying to hit a target.
Okay.
Yeah. You're going to have them go through, try to hit something to get an accurate reading on what actually they're correct, what they normally do. So.
Okay, super. And on long toss, Nick asked, max only 120 feet. When you get to 120 feet, a laser beam?
This is, again, there's a lot of different opinions out there, and sometimes it comes down to the individual. There's some that like to throw farther than that. My personal opinion is 120 feet, no more. And again, in a pitcher's way of throwing, let's just say that, instead of let's throw it 300 and see, just chunk it, Again, that's if we know that long toss is more of a speed threshold thing and not an arm strengthening drill, again, I don't see where the distance kind of comes into play. You can get yourself moving fast and throw it 120 feet than trying to throw it 100, then more than that. So.
And maybe you can answer this for Tom. If you can't, we'll ask it in the next section.
Don't worry.
To make sure.
But I don't know.
Working with Tom said many times, when I'm playing long toss, I want the ball straight. He doesn't like it up in the air. Is that basically what you're saying?
That's what I'm saying, yes. Yeah.
Okay. All right. And I just wanted to clarify to make sure. Listen, recovery is so important. We're always trying to, pitchers are pitching. I know there's pitch counts and the reasons for pitch counts. But now we want to recover so we can get back a little bit quicker, but also be safer. What are some good methods of recovery? We've done a whole show on icing, so we don't even have to agree. We don't even have to
Good. I don't have to talk about icing.
Don't worry about that. But go ahead. Any recovery phases that are important for young kids and young coaches?
Yes. I'm seeing now, let me just be really clear about something. If you are letting go, it is not recovery. Okay? So if you're throwing a weighted ball and labeling as recovery, you're not recovering. You're still adding stress to the arm. So it has to be something where you're using your own body weight and without release. That can be bands. It can be small dumbbells. It can be your own body weight. Our arm care recovery program is using own body weight. It's very shoulder centric because the shoulder is the cause of many of problems with pitchers, and they're the hardest to fix. So just keep that in mind. Make sure it involves resistance, your own body weight, or bands or dumbbell, and there's no release. Now you also want to go try and get anaerobic. And the reason for that, jogging's aerobic, but anaerobic is when you get to where you can just barely talk and breathe, because when you get that, now you have maximum oxygen blood flow, and it actually can help recruit growth hormone to go out and repair the areas that need the most, that have the most needs. So that's what our speed towels are for. We used to call them Fogels, and we changed that name to speed towels. But so recovery should involve aerobic. It's good to have aerobic, but then it also needs to involve resistance and body weight, movement of the joints, and then some anaerobic as well.
Now, every pitcher have a different recovery system. And what I mean by that is, the first day maybe a little light toss, the next day something else, that before they have their start, their next starting pitch.
Yeah.
Is everybody a little different when it comes to that? And should they?
They are, but what we find most of them we agree with is throwing daily. If you're just playing light toss, there's nothing wrong with that. I think it's part of the recovery process. So most of the good pitchers that I know are throwing, 40 feet the next day after a start, just lightly, So But it can vary, but some like to actually get into the weight room a little bit too. But the most important thing I think is if you're going to do that is that you have something that's involved with the joints moving and circulation. Get as much as that as possible.
When we talk about, because I know this question comes up all the time, talk about pitch counts, address the pitch count. I know there's a protocol you guys have, you know, one pitch, 1 hour's rest in general. I think you still have that protocol, or maybe you've changed it. But talk about pitch counts. What's the best way to use them? Because one question came up is if a pitcher throws 31 pitches in a certain point, is that a critical aspect?
It is, yeah. I mean, that's just past research that's been around for a while. But after 30 pitches in an inning, most pitchers, their muscle failure increases quite a bit. And so the stress level kind of jumps up quite a bit. So it's why for you, especially young pitchers, even if it's not their fault, I mean, you could have the defense out there kick around the ball like a soccer ball, and they have to throw a whole bunch of pitches. And it's, you know, when it gets to 30 pitches, probably best they call it a day, because the stress level goes through the roof after that.
Anything else on pitch counts, Dean, that you want to address?
You know, we pretty much follow ASMI's guidelines, but I'll say this to parents. You know, we calculate the foot-pounds of stress that comes out of an arm for your average velocity and how many pitches you throw. That's what we do in our testing. And so we calculate how many foot-pounds that is, and then we tell parents, these are the workouts you have to do to put that back in. It's just like a bank account. If you're going to keep taking money out and not put it back in, eventually you're going to go broke, or break. And so what I tell parents and players all the time, say, here's the facts. You're going to do this to your arm if you throw this many at this velocity. If you're not willing to do this work right here, don't throw the pitches. It's simple as that. Cut your pitch count down. You know, kind of like my guideline, and it's a little bit a little bit higher than this, but, you know, and this is as a father and a coach. I didn't let any of my high school players throw over 80 in a game. And so that there's that 100 mark, and you see even more than that. And I'm a little more conservative than most because of what I do. But I would say that if you know they're not going to do the work after the pitching, you just need to cut their pitches down to keep them healthy.
And I would assume some of that, I mean, if a coach understands it well, some of it has to do with body type, body strength. You know, I mean, if you got a different body type, you might go less pitching. Because I know the protocol is like 5 times their age, you know, and pitching in a game. That could be a little high for some kids. Yeah,
it can. Yeah, I think some of them are a little bit high. And, you know, some people have arm speed and no arm strength, and those are the ones that are really at risk. So, again, you have to identify, and if you have a screening process to do that, great. You should take advantage of it.
Great point. And one thing I do want to address, because I think this is critical, you don't see big league guys pitching 3 days in a row very often. You know,
no.
And yet I've seen young kids throw 3 pitches, 3 days in a row. I don't mean start, but I'm saying pitching. What's more important, pitch them that day and then rest, or pitch them 2-3 days, less pitches?
I'm going to tend to say that it's better to get all the pitches in one day.
Okay.
Instead of spreading it out, because it tends to be, it's just like a reliever. He actually can get up in the bullpen and get ready to go and create all the stress and then not go in. It happens again the next day. They actually have higher stress levels than starters because of that. So I would say that it's best for the arm and the player to try and get all the pitches in one day versus spreading it out.
Fantastic. Let me go to a question, Tyler, and you talk about Fogels. So this is on Fogels. He says, Fogels are the best. Love seeing Tom and Dad doing them on TV. How often, what times throughout the year are your pitchers doing the Fogels and speed towel?
It should be every day that you're competing or practicing. Okay, especially what we ask players to do is, and I'll say this again, sometimes players' warm-up processes are different. We're not going to be sticklers and say you have to do it exactly like this. Here's our offering, and we're saying this is the minimum, but if you can't do all that, it's great. Some say they don't like to do the speed towels before they pitch because they get too winded or too tired, and that's fine. But it most certainly should be done after you pitch, because that's part of our arm can recovery program. So we have everything broken down the blocks now, and actually all this is available on a membership now on our webpage, where it's never been before. But you have block 1, which is the core temp. Get your core temp elevated. Block 2, which is the arm care and recovery, and then block 3, which is the upper body flexibility. We like for everybody to do this before they compete. Some say, well, I don't want to do too many speed tiles or vocals because I get too tired. That's fine. You can skip that part before your start, but you be sure you do it after. Come back to arm care and recovery after you compete. But
No, go ahead. Go ahead. Go, Dean. Go.
The set for an adult, it's 4 sets of 30 seconds. You try and get 25 to 30 whips in that 30 seconds. So it's fast, and that's what makes it anaerobic. So.
Yeah, if you're just joining us or been listening, we're jumping around a little bit with questions because I think that's important. Something we haven't done in some of the shows. We always go to the questions, but we don't jump around most of the time. But one of the things, Dean, if you could address would be the, let's see here, the towel. I'm just looking to see because we're getting a lot of questions. Talk about, let's see, what are your thoughts on, the weighted balls. Let me see. Sorry, guys. My questions are jumping around as you've been. You just mentioned don't put a weighted ball on recovery, but a baseball has weight on it. Why is 5 ounce okay, but 6 or 7 not okay?
It has to do with the hold or release. Yeah. So he might be referring to throwing the next day. When it comes to recovery, we're talking about immediately after pitching, what you should be doing. To get your body, start the recovery process immediately. Throwing, you need to throw. The arm has to understand the adaptability of throwing motion. So the 5 ounce is less stress than throwing heavier balls. I think that's what he's referring to. But
and also the Mark Pro is a device that now I guess is helping with recovery. Are you familiar with the Mark Pro?
No, I'm not. Okay,
it's like a stimulator. It stimulates the muscles more instead of.
Okay. Electronic, yeah. Familiar with those devices, yeah.
Okay, so that could be another way.
Yeah.
Put in release timing almost the same time.
Release timing. Explain that more.
Jeff, you might have to type that a little bit better so we understand it. I'll give you another one. Best way to increase hip and shoulder separation in a dynamic way.
Make sure that, again, if you go back to I'll keep coming back to the biomechanical sequence. If you don't have a proper leap, guess what happens? The hips don't open properly. And then if you're not consciously trying to maintain your shoulder angle closed, it's not going to stay closed long enough. So the best way to do it is, again, if you don't want to put a lot of stress into the arm, is just do it with towel drill and what we call our crossover drill. Presets the body to start off correctly in a good balanced position to program that. And then you need to learn to leap from there because, again, the way those hips work is that it's just like, turning something. If the bottom turns, the top turns, and that's how the pelvis works. So if it's actually from the back hip coming through that gets those hips to work. So that's what a leap does. If you look at your back foot, unless it goes from the side and turns, well, then the back hip doesn't turn to open those hips. So that's why the leap, again, is so important. If you don't have that plantar flexion and that leap, the hips don't work properly. So I like the way you said dynamic. It should be trained that way. Mm-hmm. There is some things you can do in the training room to make hips more flexible, to make the T-spine more flexible. But the bottom line is you have to be able to apply that in the motion. So I would do it with a drill that puts the least amount of stress on your arm and focus on where in the sequence early on that's creating that pattern.
Something that's come up quite a bit is the UCL. Obviously, a lot of UCL injuries. And I was reading, and we've done some shows on it where the UCL can only handle so much velocity.
Right.
80, 45 miles an hour, somewhere in that aspect.
Yeah, I saw that episode, yeah.
Yeah, so what are we doing to help that, to reduce the injury? Because now we're throwing 100 miles an hour, and when, the average might have been 90 at one time or 92. What are we working on to kind of, I guess, help the UCL handle more stress?
It's going to have to, yeah, it does make sense. And they're right. I mean, bottom line is the harder you throw, the more stress there is. There's no arguing that. Now, do you do it efficiently or not is the question. And again, that comes back to the thing we were talking about earlier about vectors. It's not just about the magnitude, but the direction of all those magnitudes, meaning what all parts of my body going the correct direction, which makes a good vector, which reduces stress. So someone that throws high 90s very efficiently could have the same stress level as someone that throws 92 inefficiently. So, so it's going to be really important as we move forward in the future that we're not just looking at, you know, the variables of velocity and spin rates, but how efficient are we creating that?
Yeah, and again, we're back to the movement. I mean, you know, and I keep going back to the Japanese because, you know, I don't know. I just figure it's not rocket science. I mean, if you got great movement patterns and you're strong in certain areas, which are the important areas, I would assume you've got a better chance of throwing strikes, throwing harder, and then you could work on the other things. So my question would be this: when is the proper, if you're going to use weighted balls, let's jump to the weighted balls for a second.
Yeah.
Because, you know, I'm using common sense, so bear with me. You know, I don't have science, but my common sense tells me you're better off starting with weighted balls when your muscles and tendons or whatever is stronger and able to handle that, and your movement patterns are better. Because if you start them at 10 and it's thrown incorrectly, I would just assume from common sense that's not very good.
Correct. Yeah. So again, it's going to be more about the way they do it versus actually doing it. And I'll talk about our program a little bit and how it differs. And most people may not know this, but our program was born out of a study on shoulder health and trying to relieve GERD, glenohumeral internal rotational deficit. We were doing a study on that, and that velocity happened on accident. And so it kind of grew from there. We were never really ones to market velocity balls until later, but it all began as a health product. And that was done mostly through the fact that we hold those balls more than we throw them. And what it was doing is actually increasing the joint integrity and strengthening the deceleration muscles. And that's what was allowing the arm to go faster and create that more velocity in a healthy manner. The other thing too is, and I won't try to get too far off topic, but there's been some studies out there. I think Reinhold had one that, and I respect the study. I loved it. That said you're 24% chance of more likely being injured if you do weighted balls. Now his study didn't have holds in it, but my MODIS data tells me that when the difference in stress level and valgus stress between other programs than ours is those heavy balls. So you look at the 1 and 2 pound, and I don't think it's a coincidence, but the stress level difference between a 2 pound hold and throw is about 24%. So I don't think that's a coincidence. So again, I don't think weighted balls are a problem. I think the way they're done and the way they're done inefficiently, too many people use them without even knowing if their biomechanics are efficient or not. So you're already throwing in a stressful way, and then you add additional weight to that. Yeah, you're most likely going to be injured. So.
And you're most likely also might as well look at, everybody's going to be different, because some kids, if they're pretty good mechanically or movement pattern wise, then they probably can start on the weighted balls. Then that kid might be 13, another kid might be 15. We don't know that.
Right.
Like about teaching individuals, I think that's good. Now on the holds, when we used to do the warm up where we grab the glove, you know, and you do the warm up the arm. That strengthens the backside. We still on that? And why?
Well, we stopped using the glove because we kept tearing up kids' gloves. They kept breaking. So now we just ask them to hold a 1 pound ball and in a squishy one because what happens when we squeeze, you'll feel the muscles expand. It stabilizes joints. And so, you know, the people that are against that say, well, it's not a correct biomechanical motion. We're doing that. Well, that's not what we're working on. That's not a biomechanical patterning drill. That is a strengthening drill. So it doesn't apply at this point. Okay. So, so we still do that. And I can have as young as 9 years old, hold a 1 pound ball and squeeze it tight and go through a throwing motion, and they can handle it perfectly. And it's just making them stronger. So.
And some other things that they can do prior to playing catch to warm up. Dynamic, we talk about all the dynamic stretching and all that before they throw. But are we doing shuffles and throws where the arms are speeding up faster? and why are we doing that?
Well, I'll say this because I don't want to think we're 100% against throwing a weighted ball. I think throwing a weighted ball before you pitch can be a good thing. It's just not a recovery thing, and it's not a training thing. You're preparing to throw. So what do you want to do? You want to try and increase your threshold to get going. It's just like throwing a football. I mean, we've thrown a football for how long now? So
Right.
football's about a pound. So there's nothing wrong with throwing a weighted ball to warm up after you've done all the proper stuff before. And again, ours is set up in blocks to where we ensure that happens. If you do the blocks, you're ready to go to throw that heavy ball. So again, I don't want to say we're against it, just to be done in the right way and at the right time.
Absolutely. How about the shuffles and throws where the arm's speeding up?
Yeah, we like to both get the arm speed threshold up and the leg speed threshold up. So we'll do shuffle steps with towel, shuffle steps with ball, but we don't do shuffle steps and throws with the weighted ball. We do it in training after they do their holds, but as a warm up, I think it's just rocker leaper in a rocking position. If you want to throw against the wall, that's great. Yeah.
Folks, we got about 10 more minutes. And Dean, we jumped around a lot. So here's what I want to do here for a second, because, it's important that you need to get some things across possibly that you wanted to get across. So let's talk about what you want to talk about for a minute here and then see if there's any questions.
Yeah, so a couple things that are going on with Tom House Sports, and that's kind of our parent company now. There's a new product coming out called Mustard, and that's an app that we're going to be having that helps with biomechanical analysis. And before the call started, Peter and I were talking about, and we mentioned this on the calls about, and there's so many measuring devices out there. It's great. We have more access to good technology than we've ever had in our lives. The key is, can you take that technology and turn it into a trainable that actually gives you results? Know what to do with the information and turn it into a trainable. Some people attempt to do that, but if you look at the drill that they're asking you to do, ask yourself, is this cross-specific to a correct biomechanical sequence? If it's not, why would you train that way? So we're going to be offering an analysis tool plus training that's correct to biomechanical sequence. Now, in addition to that, that's going to be a fun tool. National Pitching Association right now has new video library online on our website. You can go and get a membership for less than $200 a year right now and have access to every one of our arm care drills, our biomechanical drills, our PNF, our nerve pathway, plyo balls, dumbbells, elastic bands, weighted balls, velocity bats, all those things are available. That's a complete training package there. And so if you're a coach or you're a player that really wants to know everything, that's what you should get. And then you should measure yourself when the new product comes out to see if it's working. Are you doing your job? We had a great story in beta testing this last week where we had a coach using the new product, the app, Mustard, and he took the video, he gave the young man his biomechanical score. He said, okay, these are the things you're doing wrong. Your head's tilted at release and your glove's outside your body. I need for you to fix those things. He worked on it through patterning with towel drill for a little bit and then did the video again. Sure enough, he got the results, a better mechanical score. I don't think either one of those things could have happened without both products. It couldn't have happened without the coach, and it couldn't have happened without the measuring device. Okay, so don't get too caught up in saying, okay, I've got the best technology in the world. You got to have the teach to go with it to really help people. So that's where we kind of are separated from the rest of the pack.
All right, and question from Paul, and you talk about the front side, the glove side being so important. Mm-hmm. I know a lot of young kids don't even use their front side, and you can just watch the front side. They throw just with their arm. What's some of the teaches on that?
Yeah.
Over that, why? Because it's so important.
So that one's gotten beaten up a lot too out in the public about, we used to, media? But I'll tell you why, because you're teaching at the wrong moment. So if you look at a picture of what we call maximum external rotation, where the chest is fully squared up, the arm's in its fully extended rotated position, right there is what we're looking to see what's going on. If that glove is still not in their center mass and a little bit off their body, guess what's they're not gonna go to target squared up. Let's just say it's over here. Now they're doing this, okay? So it's at the right time that it's important about swivel and stabilize. If you're trying to put your glove out in front of you, at foot strike, well, yeah, that's a problem. It's not going to work. Now you're out of sequence again. So the important thing is to teach that at the right time. As after foot strike, we're looking for that glove to swivel and stabilize and to be in our close to center mass at maximum rotation, and then also at release. So when we watch fast pitch motion, every pitcher looks like they're ripping the crap out of that glove. But if you stop it and look at it in slow motion, again, there's always exceptions to the rule, but most of them are working to the glove, not bringing it to them. And that's where they get that better extension. Is
it the statement correct? We need to focus more on the front arm, and that'll correct anything on the backside?
That can be that's the fix. I would say this. Now, kind of a cheat and a way to get kids to try and get opposite and equal and to manage it correctly, or any pitcher, is managing how they handle their gloves. So watch what happens. If my fingertips are horizontal and my thumb's down, my elbow stays up. What happens when I turn my fingertips up? The elbow falls. So what's going to happen? If I land like this is going to be faster than this. Now I'm going to get too spinning on the front. I'm too quick on the front. The arm, people will say, well, your arm's dragging. The arm's never dragging. You just can't catch up with the front. There's a problem with the front usually.
So where's the arm?
I would say if someone's struggling with tucking too early or not getting able to get opposite and equal, tell them to try and land with their palm facing out and thumb down. Now that could be like this, or this. That doesn't matter. But if we can just get the hand in this position, it almost always equals out the elbow angles.
Hey, Dean, do you guys use, and we got about 2 more minutes and we'll close it off. Do you guys use any reverse training in any of your methods?
What's that?
You use any reverse training? In other words, putting somebody in a position of...
Yeah, we have one drill that we do it in, and this is really important. I'm glad you asked this question. Throwing backwards and letting go backwards, the theory that the people came up with that is it actually is increasing the strength of your decelerators. Those aren't being activated in that motion. It's in the front again. And the arm isn't built to do this. I mean, because the muscle structure is not in the back to support that. It's really working on the front when you do that. We do it in slow motion with weight. It's called slow motion throws. And basically, and this is what we call proprioceptive work. With like a 5-pound dumbbell, they'll go through their pitching motion as slowly as possible. And their shoulder just going to light up. They're going to be shaking, and it's so good for the shoulder and the arm. And you feel it in the core. You feel it in the glutes and your legs and your core. And then when they get to that full all the way around the body, guess what they do? They do it backwards, just as slowly. Okay? So releasing backwards, it's really not increasing a muscle structure.
Can't hurt and hate to finish with this, but I'll let you finish the final comments. But can't hurt to play catch the other way then, right? Left-handed?
No, it doesn't hurt at all. Some people do that quite a bit, yeah. In fact, the slow motion throws we do with both arms. So, yeah, you do both sides. And you should see the guys that try to do the opposite side. It's a little embarrassing to watch. Let me tell you who is, I'll name drop, but Drew Brees is a freaking stud at it. You should see that guy. It looks like paint drying. He's going so slow from both sides. He looks exactly the same on both sides.
And what's cool about it too, it's fun especially for young kids. It's fun. It's a challenge. You could have some fun with it. And then as you get better at it, I mean, that shows that little work you put into it not only helps you left-handed, but now it's helping you right-handed also. Oh, yeah. Closing comments, Dean, for you, man. Any closing comments?
I think I said everything I wanted to say. This has been awesome. I would say this is that always keep seeking for the truth when you're looking at information. It's maybe sometimes what happens in our industry a lot is that usually the person that just screams the loudest gets listened to.
Yeah.
And so you got to be careful and just kind of think about it and say, hey, does this make sense? And if it doesn't make sense, then you probably should dig a little bit farther. It doesn't make sense to you in a sense. And then always come back to that biomechanical sequence. And I've posted a picture of one before. You can probably find it on my Twitter, but just look at that and say, if I'm what I'm doing right now, does that match up to this? Is this going to make this sequence work better or worse? So I'll leave it at that.
Fantastic. Hey, Dean, and I'll finish it with this because somebody asked, what did time change in the last 5 years? You answered some of it. I know this 5 years ago at least, I told Tom, I said, Tom, you got to get on social media, man, because people got to know what's going on out there, you know. And I love it because we got a lot of
How
great.
awesome is that? Yeah.
Yeah, and that's one thing he has finally changed. I almost fell off my chair when I saw him on social media. I said, who's writing that? Is it him or is it Dean? But again, I think it's important. Why? Because all these guys are on social media. We got some great people out there, but we need to discuss it. And I'll finish it with this. I think we need to discuss it together, the top people. And I'll give you an example. Someone asked, you know, have you guys sat down with Alan Yeager, talked about long toss? I'm sure Tom's talked about that with him many times, but I think that's more important nowadays than ever because I think you know, I get confused if I don't hear both ends. And
I agree with you 100%. What we say is that we would rather collaborate than confrontate. And so we'll sit down with anybody, any table, and go through it and find the best way that serves athletes in the healthiest manner.
Yeah, and that's the best way because in social media you only get so many letters, right?
That's right.
Exactly. Everything, and then people get pissed off, and that's not good. I don't think that's healthy. So I love it. Thank you, folks. That is Dean and Doxakis.
Nailed it.
I got it. All right. It took me a whole show. Doxakis. All right. And I am Pete Caliendo, your host. Thank you for joining us on Zoom, Facebook. Do us a favor. Just join Facebook and join YouTube at Peter Caliendo. That's all we ask. All the shows are there already, over 80 of them. Thanks to Dean. Thanks to our producer, Brian Kroc of the Line It Media Group. Thank you to everybody in the U.S. and around the world. There's a show that loves to interview baseball's best coaching minds who love to challenge the status quo. And we have 2 of the best today, but we've had others. So check out the shows. Stay safe. God bless you. And we'll see you on the baseball field soon. Thank you, everybody. See you on tomorrow's show. Hey, by the way, Ron Washington, Atlanta Braves third base coach. Don't miss it. One of the best infield people I have ever been around. And he is so enthusiastic. Love the guy. He's fantastic. See you tomorrow, folks. Bye-bye.